Hey guys, tonight we're doing something cold, muddy, and remarkably unsanitary. Life in Anglo-Saxon Britain. Not as a thane or a warrior poet. No gleaming sword, no longhouse feasts. Tonight, you're not King Alfred. You're just you, dropped unprepared into a world of thatch, thistles, and deeply questionable hygiene. Before we get going, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if my content helps you unwind. Let me know in the comments where you're listening in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim your lights and let's slip gently into the muck of the past together. You open your eyes to the unmistakable smell of damp hay, smoke, and manure. Congratulations! You've just woken up in the year 678 in a one-room timber hut on the edge of a Saxon lord's estate, somewhere in between Wessex and Mercia. You are a peasant serf. That means two things. You don't own anything, and you're not going anywhere. Your home is technically a house, but only if you stretch the definition to include 4 walls and an animal inside. The floor is packed dirt. The walls are wattle and daub, basically woven sticks plastered with a mixture of clay, straw, and cow dung. You share this space with your spouse, your children, and anywhere from 3 to 6 chickens. Maybe a pig, maybe 2. There's no chimney, so the smoke from the central hearth just floats upward and hovers around the ceiling like a lazy dragon. Good morning. Your bed is a wooden frame strung with rope covered in straw. You wake up itchy, cold, and alarmingly close to your cousin, who also sleeps here because there's no privacy in serfdom. The ropes sag under everyone's weight, turning the bed into more of a communal depression in the straw than an actual mattress. Your only personal belongings include a wooden spoon, a pair of wool leggings with one suspicious hole, and a hat that may have once been fashionable sometime before the Viking raids. You don't have shoes. You have hope, and maybe a strip of leather tied around your foot if you're lucky. Your tunic is homespun, dyed with plant roots if it has color at all, and usually stiff with age, sweat, and lye soap. The spoon is your most trusted utensil. If it breaks, you carve another, slowly, carefully. You can't afford to lose tools. Now, you might be wondering, what do I eat? The answer is, breakfast is a bowl of cold pottage, yesterday's boiled grains and vegetables, congealed overnight into something resembling sadness in oatmeal form. No sugar, no salt, just barley and seasonal despair. Occasionally, if the hens haven't been too stressed by foxes or frost, you'll have an egg to mix in. But mostly, your meals are monochrome and lukewarm. There's no kitchen. You cook over the fire pit in the center of the room, and if you're feeling extravagant, maybe you'll throw in a leek. Meat is rare. You've heard rumors of white bread and salted fish in the manor house, but such delicacies are as distant as Rome. When you're not eating, you're thinking about what to eat next. Hunger isn't a visitor here. It's a resident, and not just hunger of the belly, hunger of hope, hunger of difference, hunger of rest. There's no toilet, of course. You step outside, walk a few yards into the misty pre-dawn field, and squat next to a tree that may or may not already be taken. You wipe with moss. If it's winter, you wipe with cold moss. You don't wash your hands. Nobody does. Germ theory hasn't been invented yet, and neither has dignity. If you're particularly unfortunate, you'll contract dysentery or worms, both of which are common and barely distinguishable from everyday discomfort. Sometimes you whisper a prayer to St. Elmo just in case he's listening. Once you've handled your business, it's time to start your real business, farming someone else's land. You are legally bound to the estate, which means you don't just live on this lord's land. You are the land. You wake up early, work until dusk, and if you don't meet your quota of barley, wheat, or sheer groveling, you'll be fined, punished, or both. The manor owns not just your effort, but your time, your future, your children. When your daughter turns 12, she may be sent to the Lord's kitchen. When your son reaches 10, he'll join you in the fields. You're out in the fields now. It's raining. Of course it's raining. The mud is already halfway up your shins, and your only tool is a wooden plough your grandfather made, pulled by an ox that resents you. The ox, who has seen more winters than you, stares balefully at you between trudges, chewing cud like he's judging your entire lineage. The work is back-breaking, endless, and painfully repetitive. You are tilling a strip of soil called a furrow, and it feels like digging your own grave one miserable scoop at a time. Lunch, more pottage, maybe with onions, maybe not. If you're lucky, someone from the village brews ale from leftover grains, watery, weak, but at least safer than drinking from the stream, which is downstream from the latrine tree. And while you're breaking your back to feed the estate, your lord is drinking mead in a warm hall surrounded by tapestries and an unusual amount of dogs. He might toss you a bone at Yule if he's feeling festive. His dogs eat better than you do, but you don't complain. You can't. Serfs don't get opinions. You were born to this mud, and you'll likely die in it. Hopefully not from infected thatch splinters or a surprise Viking. And yes, they're still around. Raiders from across the sea occasionally torch coastlines and snatch livestock, children, and any shiny trinkets. You've never seen one, but the stories keep you up at night. Still, somehow, you go on. Because in the distance, past the fields, past the cold, past the reality of your aching knees and perpetual hunger, there's the faintest scent of hope. Or at least something not entirely awful. A bit of laughter during haying season, a stolen apple from the manor orchard, the sound of your child singing while chasing a chicken barefoot through the muck. You're not just surviving mud and mead out here, you're at the mercy of God, the church, and the weather, and not necessarily in that order. After enduring your dirt floor breakfast and a few hours of ploughing soggy earth for someone else's grain, you might think religion offers you peace. A quiet moment. Maybe a bit of soul comfort. Nope, not in Anglo-Saxon England. Religion isn't a personal journey. It's an all-encompassing, sky-watching, sin-dodging schedule that dictates everything from your diet to your dental situation. Christianity has arrived, yes, but it's still rubbing elbows with older pagan roots. Shrines to local spirits may still dot the woods, carefully ignored by the priest but visited at night. And as a serf, you're not the theologian, you're the audience. A barely literate, dirt-smudged audience praying you don't mess up a saint's feast day and bring down divine frost on the barley. You don't choose what to believe, you believe what you're told. The local priest, one of the only people who can read, controls not just your Sundays, but your seasons. He announces when to fast, when to feast, and when to repent for sins you didn't even know you committed. The church bell rings, and you drop what you're doing, literally, or risk eternal damnation and social awkwardness. Religious festivals dot the year, and you celebrate every single one of them whether you like it or not. There's Candlemas, Rogation Days, Whitsun, and half a dozen feasts for saints you've never heard of, but now deeply fear. You don't celebrate for joy. You celebrate because if the Virgin Mary doesn't feel properly honored, the crops might fail, and you'll be boiling nettles by November. During Lent, you abstain from meat not out of moral discipline, but because you couldn't afford it anyway. At Michaelmas, you bake a special bread, not because you understand the symbolism, but because it's tradition, and tradition is survival. And confession, that's a new and uncomfortable tradition. You kneel in front of a man in robes and tell him about the time you stole an extra turnip, or had impure thoughts about your neighbor's ankles. He tells you how many prayers you owe, maybe adds a fast, and sends you back into the mud with spiritual homework and a vague sense of guilt. You're not even sure what coveting means, but you're fairly sure you've done it. Twice. But religious fear isn't the only thing keeping you in line. There's the hierarchy. You are a serf, which is one legal notch above plank of wood and one below goose that lays eggs. The social ladder is short and slippery. At the top is the Thegan, your local lord. Below him are freemen. Below them, villains. And somewhere at the bottom, mashed between the oxen and the compost heap, you. Want to move up? You can't. Social mobility in Anglo-Saxon England is like trying to row uphill. You're tied to the land. If the estate gets sold, you go with it. You're less citizen and more bonus feature. The best you can hope for is marrying into a slightly less unfortunate family, maybe gaining access to a better patch of turnip-growing dirt. Freedom is not a concept so much as a rumor. Still, you play the game. You attend the village moot when summoned, nod at the reeve when he rides past, and try not to make eye contact with the bailiff, especially if your tithe is overdue. The moot is a crude version of justice, held under a tree or near a mound, where arguments are settled and punishments handed down with all the subtlety of a blunt axe. Every interaction is political, even if it's just borrowing a shovel. You praise the Lord's harvest, even if you're starving. You compliment his wife's embroidery, even if you're pretty sure it's upside down. Your clothes mark your station, plain, itchy, and undyed. Your speech is watched, your behavior judged. Step out of line, and you don't get a stern talking to. You get a fine, or a beating, or a stint in the stocks. Public punishment where the whole village watches you contemplate your life choices while chickens peck your feet. It's not just about humiliation, it's about deterrence. And the law, such as it is, rarely works in your favor. Marriage, it's less about romance and more about which family owns a goat. You're matched by practical need, not poetry. Love might bloom eventually, after a few shared winters and several plagues, but don't count on it. Dowries are negotiated like livestock trades, and affection is a luxury rarely afforded. Your spouse is your partner in labor, your co-survivor, and if you're fortunate, your friend. Romance, if it comes, arrives in the quiet moments, an extra scrap of bread, a shared laugh, a long glance while mending a broken yoke. And then, just when you think things might slow down, the sun begins to set. You think nighttime in the medieval countryside brings peace, a breeze, a moment of silence? Wrong century. Night in the village is pitch black. No streetlights, no torches, unless you're rich or foolish. Just moonlight, starlight, and the occasional scream, human or animal, hard to say. You learn to navigate by sound, by memory, by feel. The path from your door to the pigsty becomes instinctive. You know which creak belongs to your neighbor's door, and which means something far more unsettling. You don't wander after dark. That's when thieves move. That's when wolves hunt. That's when spirits, real or imagined, crawl out from the woods and into your imagination. You've heard tales of barrow-wights and will-o'-the-wisps, of bogies that steal breath from sleeping babies. You fear what you can't see, and in this world, that's most things. People don't just fear bandits. They fear elves, witches, and the devil himself, walking the fields in disguise. A cow dying overnight could mean sorcery. A child born with a mark could be a changeling. Your world is not divided between the natural and supernatural. It is saturated with both. Protection comes in the form of carved runes above the door, dried herbs hung from the rafters, and whispered charms passed down from grandmothers. If you're lucky, you'll fall asleep quickly on your scratchy straw mattress. If not, you'll lie awake listening to every creak, owl call, and dog bark like it's your final night on earth. You've wrapped your feet in rags. You've tucked your youngest close, trying to steal their warmth. You hope the thatch holds. You hope the fire smolders without choking you. You hope morning comes. And if something catches fire, there's no bucket chain, no alarm, just yelling, confusion, and prayer. You grab what you can, your spoon, your family, and maybe the pig, and run. Fires don't just destroy huts. They destroy entire livelihoods. A spark from a hearth can raise a village. Your only defense is vigilance and luck. Because in the end, serfdom doesn't stop when the sun goes down. It waits. It crouches in the darkness, ready for another day of unrelenting obligation the moment the rooster screams again. When something goes wrong in your body, and something always does, you don't call for a doctor. There are no doctors here, not the way the nobles mean it. No Latin-chanting, leech-carrying, university-trained men with rings on their fingers and disdain in their eyes. You couldn't afford one anyway. You go to Agnes, or Edith, or Wulfrun, or whoever in your village knows which route to pull and which poultice to pack. She's not a healer by title. Titles are for the literate and the respected. She's just the woman who knows things. Things passed down through mother's hands and grandmother's warnings. Things whispered in kitchens and woods and fields, never written, never blessed, never safe. You don't ask where she learned. You know where. The same way you know how to stack hay without bruising your back, or how to hold your breath near the stream where the corpse was found. Life teaches. Pain teaches better. These women, sometimes men, but rarely, carry knowledge the church doesn't mention and the steward doesn't trust. Folk medicine isn't science, it's memory, half faith, half trial, all desperation. When your child's fever spikes, you don't ask for citations, you ask for help. And help sometimes looks like this: a salve made of crushed marigold petals, lamb's fat, and ash. You rub it into the boil and whisper the name of St. Cuthbert 3 times, not because you believe in St. Cuthbert particularly, but because your gran did, and her gran before her, and that's a kind of power. For a cough, it's honey if you have it, or beer if you don't. Mix with nettle and garlic, heat until steaming. Drink while wrapped in every scrap of wool you own. Sweat it out, or die trying. For worms, chew bitter fern root and tie a red string around your middle. Red repels bad spirits, or so you've been told. You don't question it. You're already eating ferns. Wounds are packed with cobwebs because they're clean and soft and surprisingly good at stopping blood. Burns get a smear of pig fat. Toothache? Heat a stone, wrap it in cloth, and press it to your cheek while you curse softly. The stone won't help, but the cursing might. You believe in what works, or what seems to, or what doesn't make it worse. But then there's the other kind of healing, the kind you're not supposed to talk about. Magic. You wouldn't call it that, not out loud. Magic gets you accused. Magic gets you dragged to the moot and stared at by people you've helped. But still, when nothing else works, when the pain stays, or the baby cries for 3 nights straight, or the milk won't let down, you go looking for something older. You go into the woods, not far, never far, just past the line where the trees stop caring who owns them. There's a stone shaped like a skull and a tree bent like a praying man. Beyond that, the world changes. Birds go quiet. The air feels thick. You leave an offering, a bit of bread, a scrap of ribbon, your last copper button, and you whisper. You don't know who's listening. You don't want to. Some say there are spirits in the woods, the old gods maybe, the ones who lived here before the cross came. They weren't banished, just buried, quieted, sleeping like seeds in the dark. Sometimes someone dreams of them. That's when things happen. You've heard of the woman who cured a fever by walking backward around a thorn bush at dawn, singing in a language she didn't know. You've seen a man carry his dying wife to the stream, dip her under, and come back with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. She got better, but different. She doesn't talk now, just hums. Once, you saw Agnes spit into the dirt, draw a circle with her toe, and mutter a charm of protection over a stillbirth. The next child lived. You don't ask if that's why. You just thank her with eggs. These things don't live in the world of reason, but neither does plague, or famine, or love. And if something lives outside of reason, maybe it can fix what reason cannot. You keep charms tucked in your clothing, bits of iron, dried herbs, a carved bone from your mother's birthing cord. You touch them when the air shifts, or the ox stumbles without cause. You recite the rhyme your aunt taught you when lightning comes. 3 strikes east, I do not fear. 1 west, the end is near. You don't know what it means. That's not the point. Some nights you light a candle and don't say why, because the world you live in is raw and strange and constantly breaking, and if there's even a sliver of a chance that something beyond you might hear, why not whisper? The priest says this is dangerous, that healing comes only from God, and pain is part of his plan. You nod when he says it. You even look guilty. But you still keep the rowan twig above your door, and you still crush Poppy for sleep when the baby won't rest. Because if the choice is between starving honestly and surviving suspiciously, you pick suspicious. And maybe that's what real healing looks like. Not miracles, not perfection, just enough. Enough to make it through the night. Enough to wake up again. Enough to try the salve, the charm, the prayer, the song, all tangled together in the same desperate hope. Folk medicine isn't magic, except when it is. And magic isn't real, except when it works. And healing isn't about being whole, it's about staying. And somehow, despite everything, despite the cold and the filth and the weight of everything they've taken, you stay. Now let's talk about the kings. From your point of view, kings are less flesh and blood and more like storms, distant, powerful, and capable of ruining your life without warning. You've never seen the king. Most people you know haven't. He might as well be a myth, a walking cathedral wearing a shiny hat, somewhere beyond the forests, hills, and taxes. But oh, how you feel him. You feel him in the tithes, in the sheriff's announcements, in the taxes levied to fund wars you'll never understand or benefit from. A king decides he wants new land across the sea, and suddenly your cousin is conscripted, your ox is requisitioned, and you're left with a plough that's more wish than wood. You hear songs about the king's bravery, his lion-bannered courage, his divine right to rule. The bard sings his glory at Yule, while you chew barley bread too hard for your gums. The king's victories are toasted with wine you'll never taste. His court dresses in colours that don't even have names in your tongue. You see nobility on feast days, lords in fur-lined cloaks, nobles with delicate hands and clean fingernails. Their shoes alone could feed your family for a season. Their children learn Latin, while yours learn how to dig without damaging roots. They play chess while you pray your pig doesn't die of colic again. But here's the secret. You don't hate them. Not all the time. Because hate requires too much energy, and you've only got enough left for endurance. What you feel most often is resignation, salted occasionally with wonder. What must it be like, you sometimes think, to live without mud, without hunger, to sleep without lice, to own things, not to borrow, not to beg, but to own. Some nights, while stoking the coals, you imagine what a noble bed must feel like. Feathers, curtains, clean linens, or food, tables groaning under roasted boar, eels in jelly, apples baked in honey, music that's not just someone humming while they work, candles that aren't made of leftover tallow. You wonder if kings ever think of you, if they know about the rot in your roof, or the blight in your barley, or the baby who didn't make it past Candlemas. You suspect they don't, but you think of them. In that quiet, stubborn way the overlooked always think of their overlords. You have no banners, no legacy, no titles, but you are the one turning the soil, mending the world with your hands while others write songs about the people who sit on chairs too tall to climb. But don't despair just yet. There's something quietly radical about a peasant who survives, not just by accident, not as background noise in some Thegan's heroic saga, but by will, by grit, by sheer stubborn breath. In a world that offered you nothing but mud and orders, you managed to carve out moments of warmth, laughter, and something that, if you squint hard enough, could almost pass for pride. You weren't born to change laws, you weren't taught to write them. Your life was written for you in ash and obligation, but still, somehow, you learned how to live inside that script, and sometimes to scribble in the margins. They didn't build statues of people like you. No one chronicled your life. Monks copied the names of saints and kings. Never the woman who ground the grain for their bread, or the man who dug the ditch to keep their manuscripts dry. Your name was never etched into stone, but your fingerprints, they're everywhere. You weren't meant to be remembered, but the land remembers you. The furrows you dug, the smoke from your fire pit, the worn path between your door and the chapel bell. These things outlived you, whether or not they ever carried your name. And somehow, through it all, you found joy. Not the kind sung about in halls, but the flickering kind that hides in the cracks. A warm bowl of stew after 3 cold days. A joke told in the fields when no reeve was watching. That one May day, where the sun lasted, the mead flowed, and the music made you forget your knees hurt. These were victories, small, private, ridiculous, and entirely yours. You learned to measure time not in years, but in harvests, in births, in funerals, in winters survived and roofs patched just in time. You celebrated saints' days, not because you understood the theology, but because it meant a break from work, and sometimes even honeycakes. And maybe most surprising of all, you danced. You, the exhausted, the unwashed, the anonymous. You danced barefoot in the mud on feast days, spun in circles around a bonfire, laughing with the kind of joy that didn't ask permission. That's the kind of memory no chronicler can erase, not because it was important in a political sense, but because it was real. It happened. And it mattered to you. You didn't need a crown to carry dignity. You wore it in your posture, your calluses, your refusal to give up even when every part of you was bone-tired. You weren't perfect. No one in history ever is. But you endured, and in doing so, you left behind something strange and rare, a legacy of survival that outlasted the names carved into church walls. You didn't conquer lands. You didn't write epics, but you conquered expectation. In a world that told you your life was worth less than your lord's second-best cow, you proved that worth isn't measured in titles, it's measured in persistence. And long after the manorial records have rotted and the thatched halls have collapsed, someone will walk these fields, feel the wind, and wonder who stood here before. Maybe they'll see a broken clay pot in the soil, maybe a rusted sickle, maybe nothing at all, but the dust will remember. Because you were never meant to be a legend, you just refused to disappear. Time for you doesn't move in hours. It doesn't tick or chime or flow. It churns, like mud, like milk. It grinds forward in slow, uneven clumps, dragged along by hooves and hunger and habit. You don't own a clock, you've never seen one, but you know time. You feel it in your knees, you taste it in the turnips, you smell it in the thatch when it rots. The year, to you, isn't a string of dates, it's a loop of survival, a cycle of demands, a circle you walk with your head down and your back bent. First comes spring, not as a concept but as a crisis. The thaw is slow. The earth doesn't bloom so much as it groans, coughing up the bones of winter. Fields turn to soup. Tools warp. Your shoes, if you have them, rot from the toes inward. But it's planting time, so you kneel in the cold mud and press barley into the earth like you're burying hope by the handful. Spring brings saints' days that demand fasting, Lent stretches like a dying fire, no meat, no milk, sometimes no reason. You eat bark if it's soft enough, you chew on lard if you still have it. You celebrate the resurrection on a stomach that hasn't known indulgence since Candlemas. You look to the priest for comfort, and he looks back with the eyes of a man who had cheese last week. Then comes summer, burning through the wet. The work doesn't get easier, it just changes color. Now the wheat stands tall and accusatory, reminding you daily that it still needs cutting. There are sheep to shear, weeds to rip, nettles to avoid, children to chase off from the grain sacks. The days stretch long and hot, and you begin to dream of shade like it's a woman you once loved. Summer smells like sweat, like sour milk, like rosemary if someone's been clever. You steal a moment here and there, under the hedge, near the stream, beside your favorite pig. It's a season of stolen seconds, because the sun does not wait. It climbs, it blazes, it punishes. Your body becomes a calendar of aches. You measure time by pain. The back wrench from haying means it's high summer. The shoulder strain from scything tells you it's nearly Lammas. The blister on your heel is August whispering. You think about marking it down somehow, but the only ink you own is blood, and it's already busy elsewhere. Then comes autumn, which lies. The air turns crisp. The light slants gold. For a brief moment, the world feels beautiful, like something meant to be painted, if anyone around here could afford paint. It's the harvest season, and the village comes alive with a fever of motion. There is grain to gather, root vegetables to pull, apples to press, hay to stack, sacks to patch, fires to build, mushrooms to guess at, safe or deadly. You won't know until supper. Everyone is tired, but it's a different kind of tired, a proud kind, the kind that comes from finishing something. You even smile once or twice. There's a festival or two. Someone brings out the good ale. Someone else finds a flute. Your children run wild, chasing geese and each other. You dance barefoot in a circle of crushed leaves, laughing like you've forgotten the meaning of November. And then, like a trick, winter returns. Not with a scream, with a shrug, a slow dimming, a hush. The smoke no longer rises in playful swirls. It clings to you, thick and accusing. The earth goes hard, the wind cuts. Your fire eats wood like a starving man, and still your feet stay cold. This is the hungry season, the silent one, the season of rot and reckoning. Food runs out faster than you hoped. Your neighbor dies from a cough that started in his toes. The midwife stops smiling. Children cry more often. The priest talks more about penance. You count your sacks. You count your candles. You count your children again, just to be sure. The nights are long, so long they lose shape. You lie awake listening to your own teeth grind. The rats grow bold. You start to hate the sound of chewing, even your own. You pray, but the prayers feel smaller in the dark. The saints seem farther away. Maybe they're sleeping too. You tell stories if there's breath left. Not the ones the priest likes. Older ones. Stranger ones. About creatures in the woods. About the woman who turned into mist. About the fox who wore a bishop's hat. You speak softly, like the words themselves might wake something. You don't believe in these stories, not exactly, but you also don't not believe. Because belief, like bread, changes in the cold. And yet, despite all this, you go on. The wheel turns, the lambs are born, the barley grows. The bones of last winter are buried by the hands of this spring, and round it goes again. You don't track your age by numbers. You don't have a birth certificate. You are as old as your oldest scar, as wise as your most recent mistake. You remember things in seasons. The year of the lightning strike. The winter, the river froze solid. The summer, the plague walked through town in a blue cloak. History for you is not written. It is whispered, scratched into memory, passed hand to hand in the form of habits, warnings, jokes. You know which trees bloom first, which neighbor waters down her ale, which cloud means 2 days of storm. You are not a scholar, but you are not unwise. You know time by the taste of it, the feel of it, the smell. And for all the sermons and scrolls, for all the king's decrees and carved inscriptions, none of them understand the calendar like you do. Not really, because they don't live it. You do. Every blister, every thaw, every shadow across the threshold. Time is not a straight line here. It's a circle, a rut, a groove in the world that you walk again and again. But sometimes, if you're lucky, that groove deepens into a rhythm, into music, and for one golden moment, in the hush between harvest and frost, you remember. You are not just surviving the year, you are shaping it. There's a rhythm to your life, not one you choose, not one you can change, but it's there, steady, dull, bone deep. A background thrum beneath the grunts and groans of daily work. It hums in the way your arms swing when you hoe the earth, in the stomp of boots across frozen mud, in the creak of the cart that never stops wobbling, no matter how often you fix the wheel. This rhythm isn't music, it's labor, it's weather, it's the world. You live by sounds. Before the sun even cracks open the sky, the world begins to murmur. A rooster somewhere decides it's time. Dogs stir, chickens shuffle, a cough from the neighbor's hut. A bucket tips over, a baby cries, then stops, then starts again. Someone's always up before you. The wind is your oldest companion. It moves through everything, low and cold in winter, hot and whining in summer, always asking for something. It sneaks through the cracks in the wall, lifts the thatch like a gossip lifting skirts, howls down chimneys, rattles shutters you don't own. Some nights, it sounds like it's trying to get in. Some nights, it sounds like it already has. Rain is another song. It arrives without invitation and stays too long. It drums on your roof in endless uneven patterns. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hammers. Sometimes it's so loud you can't think straight, as if the sky itself is stomping around looking for firewood. But worse than rain is silence. A frozen silence. The kind that tells you the well is ice, the cow won't get up, and your toes might turn black if you're not careful. Silence like that isn't peace. It's a warning. even the earth makes noise. You know the difference between healthy soil and dying soil by the sound your spade makes. One crunches with promise, the other thuds like a door shutting. You know the squeal of a wheelbarrow too full, and the creak of a gate that's about to come off its hinge. You know the crack of splitting wood and the slap of wet laundry. You've memorized the gossip of birds. The sharp cry of the crow means a death, if not now, then soon. The stutter of sparrows means a hawk is near. The sudden quiet of all of them at once means something bigger, darker, maybe with a sword. And then there's the human noise. Villages aren't quiet places. Not yours anyway. They breathe, they mutter, they laugh too loud at the wrong times and argue over who stole whose radish. You hear your neighbors through the walls, curses, snores, prayers, the occasional fart that defies physics. Privacy is something nobles invented. You live in a shared noise soup, and somehow that makes the cold more bearable. You know everyone's cough, everyone's footsteps. You know who's limping, who's angry, who's in love. You know when someone's lying just by the tempo of their sentence. The blacksmith makes the loudest music of all. Clang, hiss, clang, hiss, like the heartbeat of the village, constant and cruel. His forge glows orange in the dusk, and sometimes you stand near it longer than you need to, just to feel something hot that isn't anger or exhaustion. The tannery smells worse than it sounds, but the squelch of soaking hides and slap of leather on stone still finds its way into your ears. You avoid that end of the village unless you have business or a cold. There are other sounds you never forget. The moan of someone giving birth, the scream of someone slipping into the fire, the bell that tolls for the dead, low, slow, deliberate, like a sentence being read aloud. But not all sounds are sorrow. There's the squeal of a child chasing a chicken, the splash of water on a sunny day when someone finally, gloriously, washes, the sharp laugh of a woman who doesn't care who hears, the long, deep sigh of an old man sitting down for no reason other than to sit. These things aren't music, but they matter, because even if your world is grim and aching and full of cold mornings, it is alive. It has a pulse. And you know it best in your hands and in your ears. Sometimes, if you're lucky, someone brings out a fiddle, or a pipe, or a drum made from something once alive. The music is rough, made for dancing and stomping and forgetting. You don't know what key it's in. You don't care. It fills the empty space where sorrow was trying to settle. It drives your heels into the ground and tells the world you're still here. Other times, the only music is your own voice, humming while mending, singing while digging, whispering while stitching. These songs don't have names. They aren't written down. They're passed mouth to mouth like stories or bread or gossip. You carry them with you, not because they're beautiful, because they help you endure. Even the silences have texture. The pause before a storm, the hush after a fall, the moment at twilight when the entire world holds its breath before night begins. And then, eventually, the sound of your own breath as you lay down again. Beside your family, beneath the roof, on the straw that whispers of splinters and mites. A new day will come, and with it a new chorus. The rooster, the ox, the cough, the wind, and you. The great unnoticed symphony of survival, playing for no one but each other. Let's talk about clothes, not fashion. You don't get fashion. You get layers, rags, scratchy sacks disguised as dignity. You wear what you can find, what you can mend, what hasn't rotted or been eaten by mice in the rafters. You wear what's been worn by 3 other people before you and still holds roughly together. At any given moment, at least one part of your body is itchy, damp, or cold, often all 3. Your base layer is probably a linen shift if you're lucky, or a coarse shirt made of wool if you're not. It's stiff, it's scratchy, it smells like everything you've ever done in it, because washing it too often makes it disintegrate. So you wear your grime like seasoning, layers of effort baked into every fiber. Over that goes a tunic, thick, heavy, coarsely woven, dyed with whatever plant you could boil without poisoning the livestock. Woad, maybe, walnut hulls, onion skins. Most clothing is a shade of brown or green or grey, the natural palette of poverty and practicality. Nobles get blues and purples and gold thread. You get beige that used to be beige. Your belt is rope, leather, or stubborn optimism. It holds everything in place, including your tools, your spoon, and your sense of modesty. You own one set of clothes, maybe two, if someone died and left you their best pair. On feast days, you put on your fine tunic, which is exactly like your everyday tunic, but has fewer holes and only one suspicious stain. Everyone pretends not to notice, because everyone else is pretending too. Trousers, if you have them, are laced at the waist and sag at the knee. They're baggy where they shouldn't be, and tight where they shouldn't be. They're patched with scraps from other trousers that died nobly in the field. Sometimes they're just leg wraps, long strips of cloth wound around like you're a very confused mummy. Underwear? Sure. Let's pretend shoes are a myth, or at least a luxury. Maybe you have leather soles tied with cord, or wooden clogs that double as kindling. Most of the time, you walk barefoot. You know every pebble in the path by name. You could tell the time of year by the calluses on your heel. And when it rains, which is often, you just get wet. No one owns a proper cloak unless they've stolen it from someone richer. You wrap yourself in old sackcloth, in sheep wool that smells like sheep, in sadness. You trudge through mud with your shoulders hunched against the sky, pretending it makes a difference. The rich have fur-lined cloaks. The poor have fur dreams. In winter, you wrap whatever you can find around your feet. Rags, moss, desperation. You warm your hands over the coals and your legs against whoever's closest. Sometimes that's family. Sometimes that's a pig. Either way, no one complains. Warmth is warmth. There is no such thing as dry. Once wet, you stay wet. The fire smokes more than it heats. The roof drips. Your underarms stay damp for 8 months a year. Chafing is constant. Mold happens. Fungus becomes a roommate. You share your socks with nature now. The concept of comfortable doesn't really apply. You don't dress for comfort. You dress for survival. The priest says modesty is a virtue, but it's easy to be modest when you have linen underthings and don't have to patch your backside with your cousin's dead apron. You show what you must and hide what you can. You wrap your shame in wool and pretend it's warmth. But even in all this discomfort, there's identity. You recognize people by their clothes. You know whose tunic has that tear by the hem, who always ties their belt in a double knot, who wears one green sock and one brown and insists it's intentional. You mark the years by what you wore when. That was the winter I got the mended cloak from Alric, the one with the missing clasp. That was the summer I burned my arm in the forge and wore no sleeve for a fortnight. Clothes become memories you walk around in. You mend constantly. You darn holes with threads spun too coarse and needles too bent. You learn to sew by necessity, not craft. A good patch can last a season. A bad patch can last 2 if you're determined enough. You keep every scrap, every button, every bit of string. Nothing is waste. Not when the wind keeps finding new ways in. And sometimes, rarely, you decorate. A bit of embroidery, just a few crooked stitches along a cuff. A coloured thread, saved from something better. A charm sewn into the hem to keep spirits out, or in. Little acts of defiance against uniform drabness. You don't get beauty, but you get small flourishes. You once saw the manor lady ride past in a gown the colour of dandelions, her sleeves long enough to drag through butter. She looked like a candle you weren't allowed to touch. Everyone watched. No one spoke. She probably didn't notice. Later, you made a daisy chain and wore it as a crown. You laughed, then the wind took it. Bathing happens once a season, if that. You boil water. You try to get ahead of the stink. You scrub yourself with coarse soap made of lye and old fat. It hurts. It doesn't always help. But it makes you feel, briefly, human again. Hair is braided, tied, hacked off, or hidden. You don't own a mirror. You find out what you look like by the way others flinch. There's no glamour here, no ceremony, but there is pride. A tunic well patched, a belt you wove yourself, a cloak passed down 3 generations. You hold these things tight. You guard them like treasure because they are. They're proof that you exist beyond the mud, that you endure. Because when the sky falls and the crop dies and your hands split from cold, you still wake up, wrap yourself in your tattered armor, and step back out into the wind. Clothed in purpose, clothed in stubbornness, clothed in everything you've managed to keep stitched together, and sometimes that's enough. You'd think there wouldn't be much to laugh about, and you'd be right. Mostly. There's hunger, there's rot, there's the reeve counting barley while your child coughs blood. There's a winter so long your dreams come with frostbite. But even here, especially here, humor survives. Grows like mushrooms in the dark, weird, unexpected, a bit dangerous, and absolutely necessary. Because if you don't laugh, you cry. And crying takes salt you can't afford to lose. Peasant humor isn't gentle, it's not embroidered, it doesn't come with punchlines or applause, it arrives uninvited, like fleas or rain through the thatch. It's coarse, it's rude, it's mostly about arses, priests, pigs, or all three at once. You learn early what kind of joke survives in a village like yours. Not clever court jests, not Latin riddles. The humor here has two jobs: punch up and punch through. Punch up at the people who own you, punch through the pain that wants to bury you. Take the steward, for example. Nobody mocks him to his face, unless they're suicidal, but the moment he's out of sight, the stories begin. He tripped over a goose and farted so hard it scared the oxen. He once misread a tax scroll and charged a tree. He uses a chamber pot made of ice. Probably not true. Doesn't matter. You repeat these tales around the fire, not because you believe them, but because they make you feel like you exist, like you're not just a number on a tally stick. You've got your own stories, and sometimes the telling is all you've got. Children are the best at it. They're fast, filthy, fearless. They run up behind a cow, yell "Milady" in a high voice, and run off laughing before anyone can box their ears. They sculpt crude shapes in manure piles and name them after the Lord's nephews. They play games involving sticks, shouting, and absolutely no rules. But adults aren't far behind. You share a glance over a turnip that looks like a pair of testicles, and suddenly you're doubled over in a wheezing, forbidden giggle. You whisper bawdy rhymes to each other in the fields. The bishop's foot is soft and sweet, but never let him near your wheat. He'll bless it once and tax it twice, and call it virtue, not just vice. You don't write them down. You don't have to. The village is your stage and your audience, and everyone here knows the script. If we don't laugh, we break. You joke about death too. Of course you do. It's always lurking nearby. Might as well buy it a drink. Here lies Hugh, flat as bread, got sat on by a pig, now he's dead. You tell stories about ghosts who forget their own names, about headless monks who wander into the ale shed and take a piss before vanishing. You laugh at the absurdity, not because it isn't terrifying, but because it's your absurdity. Then there's sex, or the idea of it at least. No one here has the time, space, or energy for romance, but the jokes never stop. You laugh about old Fergus and his fifth wife, about the Thatcher's son who tried to bed the Reeve's daughter and got caught with his trousers around a goat instead. You don't care if it's true, you care that it's funny. Because laughter, in the mud, is defiance. You can't change the taxes, you can't escape the weather, you can't read the laws that govern your life or pronounce the names of the men who made them, but you can laugh when the priest's cassock gets caught in the brambles. You can snort when a rich man's shoe sinks into manure. You can find glee in the fact that no amount of silver protects you from stepping in pig shit. There's power in that, and sometimes when the sun's out and no one's watching, you dare to mock God. Not cruelly, not seriously, just enough to get by. If the Lord made man from dust, why is mine always wet and crust? You tell stories about saints who oversleep, angels who lose their wings, demons who get outwitted by old women with frying pans. Your gran once swore she saw the devil himself trip over a wheelbarrow and fall into a dung heap. He never came back. She reckoned he learned his place. You laugh because the world is ridiculous. You laugh because it isn't fair and never will be. You laugh because your back hurts, your children are loud, your dinner is grey, and there's a dog in your bed again. You laugh because if you don't, you'll scream. And even then, sometimes screaming sounds like laughter. It all blends together when you're tired. Not all humor is shared. There are private jokes too, quiet ones, the kind that happen between lovers or friends or siblings who've spent too long breaking the same rocks. A knowing look, a wordless snort, a silent memory of the time the cartwheel came off in the rain and everyone ended up in the nettles. You don't talk about those jokes, they're too good, too rare. You keep them in the soft part of you, next to the dreams. The nobles think you're humorless, dull, blank-faced and broken-spined. But that's because they've never heard the songs you sing when they're not around. They've never seen the faces you pull behind their backs. They've never slipped on your icy piss path outside the alehouse in December. If they ever knew how often you laugh at them, they'd double the taxes. But they don't, so you do. And when the work is done, and the fire's low, and the stars blink through the thatch holes like cold eyes, you share one more joke before sleep. Something stupid, something small, something utterly unnecessary and entirely essential. And that's what they'll never understand. You are poor, you are hungry, you are exhausted, but you are funny, and sometimes in the darkest moments that's what saves you. Not faith, not strength, not hope, laughter, half-swallowed, mud-stained, inappropriate. But yours, you've heard of France, not much. Just that it's over the water, full of knights who wear shoes made of fish skin and fight each other over things with long names. Sometimes a bard passes through and sings about French kings and their golden swords, or French ladies with teeth like pearls and hair that smells of rosewater. You don't know what rosewater is. You imagine it's like pig water, but for the rich. You've never seen France. You've never seen a map. You think the sea might be about 4 days away, or maybe 40. You've asked. Nobody's sure. The farthest you've been is your cousin's village, and that felt like a pilgrimage. But even so, even in your tucked-away hamlet with its leaning sheds and honest stink, you feel France's shadow. You feel it in your lord's tongue. He doesn't speak like you. He uses round, oiled words when he's angry or drunk or bragging. You catch fragments, sieur, devoir, chateau. You don't know what they mean, but they come with consequences. When those words are spoken, rents go up and patience goes down. You feel it in the tax documents, when the reeve unrolls a scrap of calfskin covered in scratches that might as well be magical runes. Norman script, they say, imported like wine, only much harder to swallow. You sign with a mark. They sign with ink and power. You feel it in your name or what's left of it. Your grandfather was called Elfric, but your father became Richard. It's easier that way, they said. The priest remembers it better. Your name is John now, or Will, or something equally round and acceptable. It's a little loss, but little losses stack. Some of the laws they use to bind you come from across the channel. That's what the priest says. Norman laws, French customs. It all sounds very official, very distant, very cold. Trial by fire became trial by jury. Trial by jury became trial by who you know. You didn't vote for any of this, but you were never asked. And the French don't just bring laws, they bring clothes, or at least ideas about clothes. The manor wife once got a new veil, imported silk, shimmering like dewdrops. She wore it once and then tucked it away forever, afraid of moths and envy. You helped card wool that week until your fingers bled, wondering if it was true that silk came from worms. But none of this changes your life much. Not really. The kings fight over crowns with foreign names, and you still dig in the same furrow. They sign treaties, and you still bury your neighbor when the fever comes. They hold court in 3 languages. You curse in 1. You've also heard of Wales. You're not sure where it starts. Someone says the river, someone else says the mountains. The reeve says it's full of rebels. The priest says it's full of heretics. The tinker, who once wandered far enough to see a roundhouse, says it's full of poets and goats and stones that sing. You know one man from Wales, Dafydd. He married into the village 2 years ago. He speaks strange, sings often, and can shear a sheep faster than anyone you've seen. You like him. He doesn't mind the mud. Sometimes he tells stories around the fire, of red dragons, of kings who spoke to crows, of women who turned into owls and back again. You nod politely. You don't believe him, but you don't not believe him either. The Welsh are different, but not that different. They dig, they bleed, they bury their dead like you do. Maybe they curse God with a softer accent. That's all. And then there's Scotland. You've heard stories. Wild men, painted faces, hills that eat horses, a place where the sun barely sets and the wind can kill. No one you know has ever been, and no one plans to go. The borders shift so often it's like trying to point at fog. The soldiers talk about Scotland when they pass through. Hard men up there, they say. Eat bark, braid their beards, sleep in trees. It's said with awe and fear and a bit of jealousy. You wonder what they say about you. Probably nothing. You are not exciting, you're not in the stories. But every once in a while, something arrives from beyond. A bit of cloth with a tartan weave. A prayer you've never heard before. A joke that doesn't quite translate. You collect these pieces like fallen feathers. Useless, maybe, but beautiful in their own strange way. What you don't feel is Rome. Oh, the priest talks about it constantly. Rome this, Rome that. The Pope in his palace, the saints in their tombs. You imagine a city made of gold, paved with incense, where everyone wears sandals and eats olives. You have no idea what an olive is. You think it's a kind of fish. The church is Roman in name. But here, it's just Thomas, a man who coughs a lot and occasionally smells like wine. He blesses the seeds. He scolds the sinners. He eats the best part of the feast and then reminds you to fast. If this is Rome's influence, you're not impressed. Most of what shapes your life doesn't come from far away. It comes from the sky, from the soil, from your neighbors, from the whim of the steward or the mood of the ox. History marches past your village like an army you're not allowed to join. You feel the tremors, but you don't see the banners. The nobles talk about lineage, bloodlines, politics. You talk about weather. You're told you're part of a kingdom, a realm, a Christian nation under one God and one king. But most days your kingdom is about 10 acres wide, with a stream on one side and a hill on the other. Your nation is whoever shows up at the moot. Your God is a mix of saints, charms, and instinct. You are not ignorant, you are just rooted, and sometimes that's a kind of wisdom, because while the names of foreign lands change with every generation, and the borders blur like wet ink, your world stays stubborn. It does not forget your footsteps. It remembers the stories. It holds the bones. And when France burns, or Scotland rises, or Rome trembles, the barley still needs planting, the sheep still need shearing, the baby still needs to be born. You might never speak French, you might never see the sea, you might never know what happens in the halls of power, but you'll know the first frost by the way it smells. And that's enough. The fields feed you, the village shelters you, but the forest watches. It looms at the edge of your world, green and eternal, full of trees older than your language. You don't live in the forest, you live near it. That's how it must be. Close enough to take from it, never close enough to forget what it can take back. You don't go in alone, not often, not far, not unless you must. The woods are not empty. Everyone knows this. Everyone feels it. Some say it's the spirits, old gods, old kings, things too wild or weary for heaven or hell. Others say it's the trees themselves, that they talk, slow and low, in creaks and sighs and rustles you're not meant to understand. You never admit you believe any of it, but you never walk into the forest without leaving something behind. A crust of bread, a braid of hair, a whispered apology, just in case. You've got rules, handed down like spoons and blisters. Never cut ashwood after sundown, never whistle in a clearing, never look a hare in the eye if it doesn't blink. And if you see a tree growing in a circle, don't count them, don't step inside, don't ask questions. That's not your business. Some trees bleed red when cut. Some won't burn no matter how dry. A twisted rowan can guard against evil, but only if you ask nicely. Hawthorn keeps fairies out. Holly invites them in. And if you ever find an oak with coins driven into the bark, walk around it twice and then spit, lest the forest think you're asking for luck. Because luck is a dangerous thing. Luck doesn't come free. There are stories, of course. Always stories. Of the green lady who walks among the birch groves, humming lullabies and leading men astray. Of the black dog with eyes like coals that appears before death, or after, depending who's telling it. of the white stag, the wandering child, the man with no face, of mushrooms that grow in perfect rings and grass that flattens where no feet have passed, of voices that call your name in the wind, familiar voices, wrong voices. You don't answer. You don't ever answer. Some nights the fire dies low and someone decides to talk brave. They scoff at the stories, say it's just wind, just animals, just peasants being peasants. But no one laughs too loud and no one sleeps well after, because you know people who've gone into the woods and come back strange, or not at all. There was Edith's brother who followed a deer into the mist and came back 3 days later, mute and shaking. There was old Merrick, who said he'd seen a woman made of light near the grove, dancing with foxes. He couldn't stop smiling after that, not even when his teeth fell out. He died in spring, face up, eyes wide. There are children born with birthmarks shaped like leaves, women who bleed in time with the moon and dream of wolves, men who disappear at midsummer and return before harvest with poems they don't remember writing. No one talks about these things, but they remember. The priest calls it nonsense, heresy, pagan poison clinging to good Christian roots. But even he won't cut the elder tree near the chapel. Even he avoids the hollow by the west ridge. Because even God knows better than to press too hard on old ground. You go to the forest for certain things, mushrooms, firewood, herbs you can't grow, hazel sticks for dowsing, willow bark for fevers, yew needles for curses, though you'd never admit that. You go for berries and kindling and secret meetings. You go to hide, to cry, to shout where no one can hear you but the moss, but you never go to own it. The forest doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to the Lord either. Not really. He may send men in with axes, but the trees always grow back, crooked and defiant. And if a forester goes missing now and then, well, the forest keeps its own ledger. There are places in the woods that feel heavier than others. The air thickens. The birds go quiet. Your skin knows before your mind does. You step lighter. You hold your breath. You walk around, not through. One of those places lies near the boundary stone, just past the bend in the brook. They say it was once a temple, or a grave, or a door. No one agrees. No one lingers. You tie rags to the trees there, bits of cloth, dyed and fraying, for healing, for thanks, for protection, for nothing at all. The wind catches them like sails, and they flutter in silence, bright against the bark. There's a tree near your hut, just one, an old one, gnarled and watching. You leave a pebble there every time your child recovers from a fever. You don't know why, you just do. And maybe that's what all of it is. Not belief, not disbelief, just a kind of knowing, deep and wordless. You know the woods aren't empty. You know not to ask too much. You know that sometimes what heals you isn't prayer or poultice or coin, but a charm made of twine and bone, left under the roots of a tree that leans a little too far west. The forest is older than your church, older than your village, older than your fear, and maybe, in its own way, it remembers you. Not your name, not your face, but your shape, your breath, your rhythm, the sound of your feet on the frozen leaves, the warmth of your blood when you cut your hand gathering bramble, the ache in your bones when you kneel to gather herbs you're not supposed to know by name. The forest does not love you, but it sees you, and sometimes that's enough. You're not supposed to dream. Not really. Dreams are for poets and princes, for the king's son who saw a star fall and thought it meant destiny, or the abbess who dreamt of angels and was given a shrine for her trouble. You? You get up before sunrise to shovel pig shit. You don't get visions. You get blisters. And yet, somehow, you dream. Not the kind the priest talks about, not burning bushes or talking doves. Your dreams are stranger, smaller, wilder. Yours come wrapped in mist and straw and cabbage leaves. They sneak in while you sleep with your face in someone else's elbow, the fire low and the chickens restless. You dream of flying, not with wings, but by kicking off the thatch and rising like steam. You float over the fields, the manor, the woods, the river that curls like a silver eel through the land. No one sees you. No one stops you. You drift, light as laughter, all the way to the horizon. You dream of talking animals, pigs who quote scripture, goats who give marriage advice, a crow who won't stop bragging about how many languages it knows. Once you dreamt your old ox asked to be baptized. You said no, you have standards, even in sleep. Sometimes your dreams are vivid enough to feel like memory. You find yourself in a city made of glass. You eat bread so white it glows. You ride a horse made entirely of smoke. You meet a queen with your mother's eyes. You speak a language you don't know until you wake up and forget every word. There's no reason for any of this. You've never seen a city. You've never touched glass. The only queen you've ever heard of lives in stories and taxes. But your mind doesn't care what you've seen. It builds anyway. And not just at night. Because even during the day, you imagine. Between furrows. Between chores. Between coughs. Your mind lifts out of your body like steam from porridge. And for a moment, just a moment, you are something else. You imagine what it would be like to sleep in a real bed, to eat meat twice a week, to wear socks without holes. You imagine discovering a treasure in the woods and hiding it beneath your floor, guarding it for years before revealing it to the astonished villagers and retiring to a life of extremely moderate comfort. You imagine telling off the steward, just once. You imagine saying, "I know how many eggs I owe. I counted them myself. And no, you can't have the plump one." You imagine becoming invisible, not forever, just long enough to sneak into the manor and see what real cheese tastes like, or to tip the priest's ink over his sermon notes, or to dance naked in the chapel without consequence, just to say you did. Sometimes your imagination turns grander. You think, what if I could change the world? What if pigs laid eggs? What if cows gave soup? What if saints were women who swore and spat and still got canonized anyway? What if plows pulled themselves and priests married off their own children before telling you how to raise yours? What if everyone got a feast day? Even you. You wouldn't need much. A cake. A song. Maybe a parade of chickens. You imagine stories that haven't been told. A prince who falls in love with a turnip seller. A knight who runs away from battle to become a weaver. A dragon who just wants to nap. You make them up. You share them in whispers. You pass them down to your children, your friends, your neighbor's wide-eyed youngest. The stories grow with each telling. Sometimes they make no sense. That's fine. Truth rarely does either. And the best part? No one can take it from you. The Lord can raise the rent. The bailiff can take your grain. The priest can scold your soul. But no one, not even the king himself, can stop you from dreaming about a frog who steals a bishop's ring and uses it to marry a duck. There's power in that. Your imagination doesn't care how low your station is. It doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't ask whether you can read or write. It builds cathedrals from shadows and crowns from straw. It lets you rewrite the rules. In your mind, your life isn't just toil. It's a story. A strange, muddy, wonderful story full of spite and song and stubborn grace. You're not just a serf. You're the hero of the unwritten tale, the protagonist of the quiet world, the main character of a book no one will ever pen. But you'll live it anyway. And maybe, just maybe, that's the whole point, that you keep dreaming, that you keep imagining. Even when the roof leaks, even when your spoon breaks, even when hope seems as far away as Rome. Because someone has to imagine a better season, a kinder steward, a spring without frost, a world that sees you, not as fodder, but as human. And until that world arrives, you'll keep planting barley and telling stories and laughing about frogs with ambition. You'll keep waking up every morning, sore and grumpy, and 5 minutes late, with a dream still clinging to your face like soot. You'll keep imagining your way through a world that wants you small, and in doing so, you make yourself enormous.